All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We want to welcome you to another installment of our research webinar series hosted by our team here at the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute, or MVLRI. The goal of MVLRI is to expand Michigan's capacity to support new learning models, engage in active research to inform new policies in online and blended learning, and strengthen the state's infrastructures for sharing best practices. MVLRI is a division of MVU, or the Michigan Virtual University, a nonprofit organization whose mission is advancing K-12 education through digital learning, research, innovation, policy, and partnerships. MVU is also the parent company of Michigan Virtual School, a supplemental state-sponsored virtual school, Michigan LearnPort, an online professional development portal for K-12 educators and personnel, and MyBlend, a blended learning initiative providing K-12 schools with resources, products, and services to personalize learning options for their students and improve student achievement. We want to make mention of a quick disclaimer before we begin today. This webinar will be recorded and shared publicly. Consequently, anything shared during the webinar, including chat comments, could be shared publicly. This webinar may represent a presenter's or an attendee's personal views, opinions, conclusions, and other information which do not necessarily reflect those of MVU and or the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute and are not given nor endorsed by MVU/MVLRI unless otherwise specified. I'll take a quick moment to introduce our presenters today before handing it over to them. Nancy Dana is a professor of education in the School of Teaching and Learning at the University of Florida. Her research focuses on teacher and administrator professional development with a particular focus on practitioner inquiry. She has published 9 books and over 60 articles and book chapters on the topic. Kara Dawson is a professor of educational technology in the School of Teaching and Learning at the University of Florida. Her research focuses on how educational technologies can support K-12 and post-secondary learners in face-to-face, online, and blended environments. With that, I'll hand it over to our presenters.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is Kara Dawson, and before we get started, since we have such a small group, I was hoping that maybe either through the chat window or through using your microphone, you could let us know a little bit about your background so we know who we're talking to. We can't see you, but it would be nice to at least know the audience a bit. And I believe they gave everyone microphone privileges, so. Awesome. Thanks very much. We've got a good group here. So we also have a small group. So what Nancy and I would like to do is just welcome you at any time to jump in with something, because we have some knowledge. We don't have all the knowledge, but we will share with you some of the things that we know. Catherine and Justin asked us to talk about research on teacher mentoring and professional development for K-12 online teachers. We're actually going to flip that around and do professional development and mentoring, because we see mentoring as a subset of the larger professional development umbrella. And we're going to get started with Nancy talking a bit about professional development, in particular, what we know about professional development across the board from brick and mortar to online. And what we're going to talk about today comes from 2 chapters that we wrote in a recent handbook called the Handbook of Research on Online K-12 Online and Blended Learning, edited by Rick Ferdig and Catherine Kennedy.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kara. This is Nancy. Okay, and so as Kara said, we just wanted to start talking about professional development in general, because we see that as the broader endeavor, and mentoring as a subset, a specialized form of professional development. And I'm going to begin by talking just a little bit about what we know about professional development as it occurs in brick and mortar context. And in essence, that's what we did in both of these chapters. What we did is we looked at the literature and what is it that we know about professional development in brick and mortar context, and then what do we know about it in K-12 virtual context, and what are the connections between them, because we think that there's a lot to be learned across both contexts. So I'll begin talking a little bit about professional development in the brick and mortar context and what we know from research and what the lay of the land looks like. And basically, in this context, professional development exists along a continuum. And you see that on your screen there. And on the left-hand side of the continuum, professional development is really event-based, which is a moment in time that a group of teachers may come together and experience a lecture or an expert. I noticed one of the words that was shared at the beginning, Diane put down expert when she thought about mentoring and professional development. So this is the idea that an expert might come to a group of people, deliver a lecture or a workshop at one moment in time. And then if we slide down along the continuum to the other end, we get not a look at professional development at the moment in time, but rather professional development throughout time. And there's this notion of job-embedded professional development in brick and mortar context that looks at professional development as occurring on a daily basis within a teacher's classroom. As he or she is teaching, she's learning from the teaching event. So what we know from research on these along this continuum is that if we go to the left-hand side of the continuum and we look at PD as a moment in time, a lecture or a workshop that teachers attend, it isn't very effective in and of itself when used in isolation for brick and mortar teachers. Borko has talked about it being fragmented and intellectually superficial, and we know what happens is from our, not just the research that Kara and I have looked at, but our own personal experiences working with teachers in professional development endeavors, they often refer to these events, often unaffectionately, as sit and get kinds of days where they come in, they sit, and they listen. They're not very active. And we've also heard many administrators refer to event-based professional development as like spray and pray days, that we bring teachers together, we spray them with some new knowledge, and we pray that they're going to get something out of it and bring it back into their classrooms. So again, what we know from research is that this approach in and of itself isn't effective for professional development of brick and mortar teachers. So with that knowledge, there certainly is a movement in the field to move towards more job-embedded forms of learning. And again, the contrast is rather than it be a moment in time, job-embedded learning occurs throughout time, and it's defined as systematic, planned, intentional, and regularly scheduled efforts to embed teacher learning within teachers' daily lives. And I think some of the words that were shared maybe by Kathy in the very opening were complex, essential, personal, and I think those words kind of encapsulate the idea that a one moment in time event professional development, while it may provide a foundation, in and of itself, it won't contribute significantly to professional learning, which makes job-embedded types of experiences even more important. So what we wanted to do is take a moment now. We've kind of looked at this continuum and what a broad overview about research says in relationship to that continuum. And we were wondering what your experiences were, and based on this foundation, what you all believe core features of effective professional development to be. We'd love you to contribute by picking up the mic if you feel that you would like to do that, or of course there's always the chat box too.
And even though we're virtual, we're going to be okay with wait time.
Great. We've got some great core features based on your experiences being shared. So now what we'd like to do is sort of compare those features to what we know from research are core features of effective PD. And actually, much of what was shared in the chat box really aligns nicely with these core features. And in fact, there's even room for expansion. So I think we've got an article coming out of this webinar. So anyway, let's begin by just looking at core features of effective development as defined by Desmond. She is a researcher that did a synthesis of research on professional development in brick-and-mortar context in 2009. It's a seminal piece. And from looking across all of the research that's been conducted on professional development, she was able to define these 5 core features that you see in front of you. And as I said, many of them connected to the ones that you all shared. So the first is actually this notion of content focus, which means that professional development needs to emphasize both the subject matter content that teachers are teaching, as well as how students learn that content. So there definitely needs to be a connection to the content, the subject matter that the teachers are teaching. The second component is active learning, and I believe this came out very strongly in the chat box. And that's the idea that teachers in professional development are not just passively listening to a lecture or an expert talk about a particular teaching and learning promising practice, but rather having opportunities for teachers to be actively engaged with that practice, such as by maybe observing others teaching, participating in interactive feedback and discussion about the topic of the professional development, and maybe even reviewing students' work in relationship to a particular PD endeavor. Then the third component defined by Desmond is coherence. Coherence, and I think this was shared by Diane in the chat box, the idea that professional development needs to be connected to school improvement plan. I think that's the notion of coherence, that it relates to the extent what is being taught in the PD program is aligned with state goals, district goals, school goals, and standards for student learning. So Diane nailed that one right on the head there with coherence. And then duration. I think Justin and Catherine both talked about the importance of it being long-term and sustainable over time. And that was something that Desmond also found across these studies, that there is not yet enough research to talk about and determine an exact amount of time that's needed for a program of PD to be effective. But what we do know from research is that it appears that at least 20 hours of contact time is recommended over time on a particular topic of professional development. And then finally, the notion of collective participation. And I think this connects to Kelly's comment, being part of a network driven by the teachers. Beth talked about being personalized. This notion of collective participation refers to teachers working together. Teaching is a very isolated act, and it definitely can be a very isolated act. So certainly professional development efforts that bring groups of teachers together to help those teachers learn with and from one another and capitalize on each other's experiences and their wisdom of practice are seen to be effective.
So now what we'd like you to think about for a few minutes is how the core features that Nancy just talked about might apply, might need to be modified for professional development for online teachers. And once again, we'll give you a few minutes in the chat box, although you all have wonderful microphones up there, so feel free to use them. free to keep talking in the chat window. I think you came up with some really excellent things, and one of the things that Nancy and I tried to do in our chapter is look at the core features that Desimone has presented and that have been supported by research, and think about additional considerations that may need to be thought about for online teachers. And so one of the things that we thought about with content focus is that the virtual school or the online teaching world is sometimes more complex than the brick and mortar environment because it seems like there's more non-instructional people, administrators, designers, counselors, people that need professional development focused on the goal of the school or whatever the goal of the professional development is, but within their area. And so we thought that was one consideration to possibly think about. For active learning, Catherine, I think, touched on this. There's a lot of opportunity for active learning with the technology, whether it be face to face or online. A lot of people mention that online teachers like face-to-face professional development, and I know that there are often options for that, but not always. So the technology can afford some of that active learning. Mentioned the idea that not only does it need to align with whatever the standards are, it also, the content standards, it also needs to align with whatever standards for online teaching and learning the institution has adopted, and with whatever media or technologies or learning management systems that the teachers will be using when they teach in their online context. And that's something that brick and mortar professional development providers also don't often need to consider. As far as duration, there was, I think it was Anne, right? Can't read my own writing. Someone mentioned the idea of self-paced professional development courses, and we wonder, and there's no research to support this, but we wonder if the event-based professional development mixed in with the job-embedded professional development might be ideal for virtual school teachers, because there are technical skills and other things that they need to learn that could very well be event-based. And someone in there did mention that professional development for online teachers is often self-paced. And as far as collective participation, the technology affords all kinds of communication and collaboration that is often not available in brick and mortar environments for teachers. I think that's changing a bit, but not necessarily changing in the way we conceptualize professional development. So those are some things that we thought might be different between, or at least something to consider if you're doing professional development for online educators as opposed to simply brick and mortar educators. Oh yeah, and Kathy mentions using analytics, and there's also mention about meeting the needs of different students. Yep, excellent. Excellent. So now what we'd like to do, now that we've kind of reviewed the core features of professional development from the research, talked a little bit about how those may be modified or expanded upon for professional development for online teachers, there are some models of professional development in brick and mortar institutions that have been researched and that have been proven effective with teachers across not only grade levels and subject areas, but also across countries. So Nancy's going to talk a little bit about those models, and then we're going to share a model that we then applied to an online environment.
Okay, so these models all are sliding to the right of that continuum and represent job-embedded forms of professional development. And I'm actually going to start with the middle one because that is the one that Tara and I have the most experience with ourselves and have done the most work with. And that's engagement of teachers in inquiry or action research. And what we did in our chapters is we shared each one of these models that we know from research are effective. We defined them, shared a little bit about what the research tells us, and then we applied these models to virtual situations. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about inquiry and action research in a few minutes applied to K-12 context, but first let's just look at these three models define them, and look at the research that supports them. So again, starting in the middle, inquiry, action, research, basically that's defined as, I'm sure everybody's probably familiar with all of these. So just briefly, as a foundation, let's define them, think about them, and then apply them to virtual context. So inquiry, action, research is defined as educators systematically and intentionally studying their own practice. What we know from research is it promotes that engagement in studying your own practice as you're engaged in it, promotes growth and improves practice, it fosters empowerment of teachers, and it also influences student learning. Moving over to the left-hand side, another model of effective professional development indicated by research in brick-and-mortar context is lesson study. And I'm sharing this second because in essence, lesson study is a specialized form of inquiry or action research. In lesson study, what a group of educators are doing is coming together to systematically study a particular lesson. So it's sort of a specialized version of practitioner teacher inquiry or action research. And what we know from research is that the process of lesson study leads to better lessons, it leads to stronger content knowledge, and enhanced observation skills of teachers as they study a particular lesson, develop a question about that lesson, implement that lesson multiple times in different classrooms with different teachers, and serve as observers and data collectors for one another. And then finally, I'm going to move all the way over to the right there and share professional learning communities. There's been a proliferation in the literature about professional learning communities and the ways this professional development endeavor contributes to effective learning for teachers. And in general, professional learning communities are defined as small groups of educators who meet regularly to study teaching and learning practices. And I ended with this one because in essence, professional learning communities serve as a container for things like inquiry action research to unfold within and lesson study to unfold within. But there's that idea again as of sustained over time professional learning that teachers come together collaboratively to learn with and from each other. And from research, we know that professional learning communities are certainly effective in promoting teacher learning that influences student learning, and it promotes a culture of learning and improvement within a school building. So while we were able to glean much about these models of professional development from brick and mortar context and the way they've been researched and written about in brick and mortar context, we found less research on job-embedded forms of learning in virtual context, a lot more description of models and particular attempts at engaging virtual teachers in effective PD, but less actual research on any of these practices. So what we want to do now is just share with you a research endeavor that we engaged in related to one of these job-embedded forms of learning, which is virtual educator action research. Kara and I had the opportunity to work with a large virtual school to both institute a program of action research with the virtual educators that worked within this particular school, and then also simultaneously not only institute this program, but study it as we were engaging professionals in this school context in this process of inquiry or action research. And the professional development program in this particular school started out with learning about action research, what the entire process was like, and then it engaged participants over a period of time, a long period of time, in identifying personal wonderings or burning questions that they had specifically about their practice as virtual educators. And once a question was identified by them, then they moved towards creating a plan to conduct research to gain insights into that personal question, of course, through collecting and analyzing data. Once the plan was constructed, again, over time, they collected and analyzed data. And then the program culminated at the end of the school year. It actually was a year-long endeavor where there was, in essence, a conference, a virtual conference, where all of the participants shared what they learned through engaging in this process of action research. So in one of the studies that we did to analyze these teachers' experiences, we wanted to understand how K-12 virtual school teachers experience this process and this form of job-embedded learning within their K-12 virtual context. And also, all of the PD was delivered virtually. So we wanted to understand that. So one of the studies we did was analyzing the nature and the content of the studies that they did into their own practice. And you can see here on this slide, this is just a snapshot of some of the analysis and examples that fell into different categories. One thing that was quite interesting in this particular context and the way this played out is there were two types of personnel at this particular school, and both types were engaging in the PD around engaging in studying your own practice. There was instructional personnel that had responsibility for the delivery of courses and teaching online, and then there was also non-instructional personnel. So you can see in the next column, what we were able to do is sort of categorize the nature of the topics that they studied and sort of their dilemmas, their burning questions. And on this slide, you see 4 different categories, including student completion rates, of course progress, enhancement of academic learning that occurred for the virtual school students as they engaged in coursework, meeting the non-academic needs of virtual school students, and then for the non-instructional personnel, examining the functioning of the organization, its categories of employees, and the relationships between them. And you can see in the right-hand side some of the many examples that they were of the individual action research that fell within these categories. So we're going to pause for a minute and ask you to share anything you notice or seems interesting or intriguing to you about the ways action research played out in this K-12 virtual environment.
So maybe that wasn't a good question. Well, you know, one thing that stuck out to me was particularly the second category. The teachers were really trying to put their own stamp or their own creativity into supporting the academic learning of students. And I thought that was really interesting. But one thing that I'd like you to think about as we move forward in this presentation is this is one snapshot of one research study that was done at one virtual school. Picture what would happen if we had lots of snapshots from lots of virtual schools or lots of places that provide K-12 online professional development. We could probably pull out some themes within and from those to learn a whole lot more about the way online teaching learning functions in such environments. And so I think it's really important to start thinking about how we can actually start sharing this information in a usable way.
So I guess we'll also share that one of the things that we understood from the research that we did was not just the topics that they investigated and covered, but also the nature of the experience for them. And we just want to end this segment by sharing a couple of the quotes from the participants in this PD effort. So one of the virtual school educators shared, you know, it was the first time I've actually sat back and watched what I was doing, and that was a really interesting experience, and I loved it. It's easy to sign up for a session and take notes and hear about great things you could try, but to be able to sit back and kind of observe yourself and see exactly what's working for you and what isn't working for you. I know all the theory and so forth, but really and truly, how am I carrying it out with my students? That was professional development like I've never experienced it before. And another quote from a participant, the whole concept of objectively watching yourself do what you do and being open to learning from what you're doing well, what you're not doing well, where there's room for improvement, the impact on kids, and the impact on the school. It's almost like videotaping yourself and then being open enough to make changes to your teaching. And I think that's one of the targets you've got to look at is you need educators who are interested in watching what they do and seeing what they do and seeing what they do well and what they don't do well with the interest of growing from the experience. We kind of think these two quotes encapsulate this notion of job-embedded professional development and how when professional development is intimately connected to your practice, whether it's action research or lesson study or learning communities, it can certainly exhibit all of those core features that we talked about, and together it comes together to create a powerful opportunity for teacher learning.
And before we move on, I just want to answer Beth's question. Did anyone experiment with school policy? I don't know in those terms. They looked at certain things that were going on in the school and how well they were working, particularly the non-instructional personnel, but I don't know that anything was phrased as school policy, but that's certainly an option for an action research type of professional development experience for the right type of virtual educator. So we're going to transition from professional development to mentoring as a specialized form of professional development. And you also see a continuum. Somehow I guess we enjoyed making continuums. Typically, mentoring is, in a brick-and-mortar context, reserved for novice teachers, often what's called during their induction years. However, it is career-long in both brick-and-mortar and obviously in online environments, and we think it's particularly important to be career-long with online teachers because of all the changes that happen in the environments within which they teach, and also because you could be a very experienced teacher and be a novice online teacher. And so mentoring, I think, takes on a different flavor when you're talking about mentoring for K-12 online teachers. So there's a lot known about mentoring, and in our chapter we review some of the literature that you see on your screen. And we review it not just from the K-12 perspective, but there's interdisciplinary research on mentoring. We know the benefits and challenges, we know the characteristics of effective mentors and mentees and effective programs, we know strategies to best support mentoring, and all that's in the literature. It's not all that exciting to talk about, so we decided to not belabor it, but we do know a lot about how mentoring works. We also know some about mentoring for K-12 online teachers. Dolly and Rice's survey, I think from 2010, about 60% of online teachers reported they participated in peer mentoring or peer coaching. And there are some great iNACOL publications that describe works related to mentoring. Most of those, almost all of those, do provide little or no evidence to support whether the mentoring program was working or not. And so that's kind of where Nancy and I found the rub when we tried to write our chapter, because it was supposed to be about research, and we have a lot of descriptions. And that's a really great start, but we had less luck finding research that is published about mentoring for K-12 online teachers. So we'd like to kind of go back to our own experiences where we were able to do some research on mentoring for K-12 online teachers. So the second year of the Virtual Educator Action Research Program that we talked about, the first year the coaches or the mentors were from the university. In the second year, we instituted a program where we were preparing mentors from the virtual school to mentor other virtual school teachers or educators in the action research process. So we followed the same cycle that Nancy talked about, except the mentors, our focus was on supporting the mentors to mentor the virtual educators doing action research. So we did not have any contact with the actual virtual educators conducting the action research. And in the mentoring process, we learned 3 things. And I think what we'll do is we'll share those results with you, just so you can get a flavor for things to maybe consider based on what we learned if you're going to set up mentoring programs. The first one, I shouldn't say if you're going to set up, most of you probably have mentoring programs. If you're going to research mentoring programs, mentoring at all of the critical junctures of action research was incredibly important. And this played out in the data that we collected in many, many ways. This is just one quote, but having mentors that are prepared to actually coach the process from beginning to end was absolutely crucial. The other thing that we learned, we tried to be creative in our mentoring program, and we tried to use a lot of different technologies to support different types of communication, thinking that we're working with virtual educators. I think we overdid it, and so the mentoring program, most of the mentors recommended that we not have as many ways to communicate, and so single online management system is probably the best way to go. And the other thing that we thought was really telling was that administrative knowledge and support sometimes wasn't there. So this is from one of the mentors saying that I don't think my supervisor knew what I was doing, the time commitment that I put in. They need to be aware of it, and so any kind of mentoring program needs to be basically, what word am I looking for? It needs to be systemic across the institution. So this particular mentor felt like she was not supported from the administrators, even though the school itself was the one that was supporting the mentoring program. And so what we'd like to do in the time that we have remaining is ask you if what we're missing in terms of research on mentoring or professional development for K-12 online teachers. We have access to peer-reviewed journals, we have access to publications and white papers, and we're finding very little in the research, and so I'm wondering if you can point us to other articles, other studies. Okay, maybe there isn't any research, and maybe we didn't miss anything. Maybe we were a little bit frustrated trying to find the research. Like I said, we found the descriptions.
Dr. Dawson, I don't know, can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Hey, thank you and Dr. Dana for all of this. This is really wonderful stuff. I had a quick question that may be a little bit of a tangent from the question you just asked.
Sure.
But I was wondering if in your research you had come across maybe systems that could aggregate the interactions that happen online, or the interactions between teachers, through either commentary or resources that they're looking at. And there's some type of machine learning that goes on in the background that can then kind of figure out or recommend either pathways for those teachers to take based on their interests, or bring resources to them based on the interactions that they have. Have you come across anything like that?
Not in the research. I have heard a lot of talk about that, not just for teachers, but also for students. Personalized learning, I've heard a lot of talk about it, but I have not seen research on it. Do you know of any?
Well, we're also looking, and I was just curious to know if you guys had come across any, because one of the things that we're seeing as well is, as you mentioned, certainly we do a lot of talking about being able to provide these affordances for the students. But for teachers, I know a lot of the commentary was based around, how do we personalize, a lot of this professional learning for that teacher, so that one, they're more motivated to want to be involved in it, then at the same time know that it's contextual to what they're going through, right? So how do we then use the technology or the tools within this online or even blended environments to be able to facilitate that? So I don't know if anybody else on the audience had anything along those lines that maybe they could share with us.
I think it's a great thought, and the models that we presented do personalize learning, but not in the same way that you're thinking about it. You're thinking about it, I think, more systematically, maybe. So action research is a very, very personal type of professional learning, but it's not machine driven.
And as a teacher is going through this process of action research and looking at answering the questions that they have set before them, they'll have certain interactions that they do, right, to be able to learn more about what it is they're looking at. So within those interactions, can the system then be able to help them by connecting them with other folks that have the same interests, or finding resources for them that relate to the kinds of things that they're working on? I guess that's kind of where I'm going with that. I'm not sure
I think that would be great, and we have actually had some conversations along those lines, because what you're talking about, Gino, is kind of what the mentor does now, but having it done in a more systematic and somewhat easier way would be wonderful. Okay, we're gonna conclude, and then we'll stay on the line, certainly, if anyone would like to continue to talk about this. But here are some things that we thought about as we put this webinar together to advance professional development and mentoring for online teachers. We need evidence, and I think sometimes we're talking to people that do a lot of work in practice, and people like us who are trying to figure out what's going on across programs and across schools and across teachers would love to see your evidence, whether that be through journals or conference presentations or peer-reviewed papers, however you would like to share it. We would love to see it so that we can start making connections between and among what's being found. And the other thing, there's several researchers that I know of that are in this webinar, and we had a wonderful time collaborating with the folks at the virtual school to conceptualize this professional development and then conceptualize the research that would be going on around it. There's a lot of people like us running around that would really enjoy those opportunities. So those are just some final thoughts that we had. And then we would welcome you to contact us at any time. I'm anticipating that Rick and Catherine will email us any day for an updated version. And we found very little to add so far for the updated version of the handbook. So if you do come across research or have ideas, please do let us know.
Great. Thank you so much to our presenters today. Obviously, chat window will still remain open for anyone who'd like to pose a question or contribute any more to the discussion. So we really appreciate that. We appreciate our participants for coming out today very much. Before we conclude, I did just want to point you to a couple of ongoing MVLRI initiatives as well. We have our podcast series, which you can check out by clicking the link there to listen to past episodes. And if you're interested in actually being a guest on the podcast, we do have a former guest in our attendance here, Dr. Kathy Kavanaugh, so be sure to check out her episode. If you have an interest in being a guest, please shoot me an email personally. I will put my email in the chat window. And then we also have our guest blogger program. So if you're interested in writing for us, you can check out the specifics of that initiative by clicking that link there as well.
That guest blogger program might be a great place to include not only description but data.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. I believe that link is clickable there, but I can also, maybe Catherine can type that into the chat window just in case as well. And then we have our upcoming webinar next Wednesday, June 10th at 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll be hearing from Ed and Andrew over at Pomoja Education, I believe the only approved provider of online international baccalaureate courses. So we'll be hearing about some of the research that they've commissioned and their program model as well. So if you have an interest in that, please join us next Wednesday at 11 a.m. In the meantime, you can keep in contact with us. You can reach out to us, offer some feedback on the webinars themselves, on the process, or if you'd like to present at one of our webinars, please reach out to us and let us know your interest. MVLRI@mivu.org. You can sign up for our mailing list by clicking that link there on the second line, and then you can keep in touch with us on Facebook and Twitter. Our handles are listed, as well as our LinkedIn page, our YouTube channel, where we host the recordings of all of our webinars. You can expect to see the recording of this one being posted pretty shortly here in the next day or so. And then our webinars page on our MVLRI.org home site, where you can see all of our upcoming webinars listed there, as well as the archives. And be sure to check that out. Hopefully you find some value there as well. With that, I will again leave the chat window open, leave the microphones open for a little bit if there's any other discussion or questions that need to be had. We thank you all for joining us. Thank you again to Kara and Nancy. Great presentation. We really appreciate it. Take care, everyone.